at home on the gallops, we can collect heart rates, stride data, and we start to put up quite an interesting picture. We can look at heart rate recoveries, for example, on horses. How fit are they? How talented are they?
It is Outgate out in front here from Koi Koi. Outgate, Ryan Moore again. There's no stopping him. Outgate wins from Koi Koi.
And a very warm welcome to a Barstewards special. Yes, we like to do the odd special now and again. I'm pleased to say, and a very warm welcome to tonight's special guest, Daniel Kubler. Good evening, Daniel.
Evening, guys.
Yeah, good evening. Myself and John will be talking and chewing the fat with Dan about various factors of British racing at the moment and the problems that we're in, how we can possibly improve it, what Dan would do if he was in charge, etc., etc. But first of all, for our listeners, Dan, I want to get them familiar with yourself. You started life early on. You travelled the world. You've had experiences with Gay Waterhouse, I believe. You've spent your training time as assistant at Roger Charlton's. And now you and Claire are going it alone. So explain to me about your background and everything, just for our listeners.
So I grew up in a family that had absolutely no interest in horses, no interest in racing. So I come at it from a completely different background, I suppose, to most people. And I liked riding a bit as a kid. And my family is originally from Switzerland, hence the surname. And we used to go there for sort of summer holidays, and they were all farmers, and we used to mess around on the horses there. So that's how I sort of learned horses, and I liked that. And then I finished school. I didn't know what on earth to do with myself. So father had just passed away. So I was sort of supposed to go to university, but I didn't really fancy it at the time. So I worked a bit and did a load of rubbish jobs. Went down to Australia, went sort of backpacking around, and ended up doing a trail ride one day with a guy. And I got on with him, and he sort of said, "Oh, you can stay here for a week and you can do this package." So I thought, okay, that's great. We'll do that. Did that. He said, "Oh, do you want a job here for a bit, helping out with the horses?" So I did that, and I spent ages with him. He taught me a lot, sort of, those old kind of cowboy style ways of working with young horses and things like that. And he said to me, "Look, if you like racing a little bit and you want to make a living with horses, it's the only way to make a living with horses, unless, to do it." So I come from sort of horsemanship first, would be kind of my approach to things. And then from there, I went to the National Horse Racing College now and did my course and went and worked for Tom George over jumps for a while. And then I went and did a degree in equine and agricultural business management, and then worked for various trainers. Did a bit of time in the States with Ben Cecil as well. I was out in America, and I'd worked for Roger, and I was Ben's assistant in California, and sort of visa was running out and looking to come back. And I was chatting to Brian Meehan, who'd taken a horse over for a big race. And it's one of those situations where someone else's misfortune gives you an opportunity. But Ben, who I was working for at the time, had a very premature son. So I kind of was handed a lot of responsibility, and I was doing an awful lot with kind of Ben in the background, kind of steering me while he dealt with the challenges of that. And, fortunately, everything worked out well there. That was good. But I was chatting to Brian one day, and I sort of, said, "What am I going to do when I come back?" And he said, "There's no point going and watch someone else make mistakes. You need to go on out on your own at some time, and you look like you know enough to give it a go. There's no point learning from my mistakes. You learn much more from your own." So we came back. Claire was working assistant for Jeremy Nazida in Newmarket while I kind of got bits and pieces together. And I suppose you always, when you're young, you think, you look at what people are doing and you think, well, I could do this better. And, it's a bit of arrogance, isn't it?
Yeah. No.
You soon learn it's a little bit harder than it looks.
Yeah, exactly. Every sportsman or every professional sportsman or every professional trainer, professional jockey will always think, I can be that. So yeah, it's just interesting that you've got that level of ambition there already.
So yeah, that's kind of my background. We started out and we had 6 horses, and we're fortunate then Claire's parents are pretty good breeders and they have some nice horses. But, certainly to begin with, they kind of sent us the sick, lame and lazy, and the backwards ones, and the good ones were still going to William Haggis and Eric Alston, who obviously done very well for them. He trained at Reverence. So I'm sad to see him retiring this week. We both come from a very scientific, analytical background. My family are all medics and physiotherapists and things like that. And Claire studied natural science at Cambridge. So I kind of wanted to bring some of that kind of slightly more forward-thinking approach to training as well, not just kind of copying what your forefathers had done for the last 3 generations, and just try and think about it a bit more analytically. Try and develop something, say, a different approach, but the horsemanship is still the foundation, but then you're just using data and analysis and things like that to progress and get a bit more from the horses. And it's taken us a while, I think, to get going, but I think this season we've kicked on a bit in terms of had some decent winners, and we've always been able, we very early on we had a couple of stakes placed 2-year-olds, and probably weren't able to really capitalise on what we'd done with those horses. And then we moved up to Lambourne. It didn't really work for us when we first moved here. And we were renting a yard and we just couldn't make it work. And eventually we bought an old rundown farmyard and built a brand new facility, which we were very lucky to do. Since we moved in here, things have really just gone forward and the horses are healthy, they're happy. And I think the other thing we realised when we came up to Lambourne, we kind of fell into having a good team when we first started training through circumstances of trainer training where we were before moving on, and we got some good experienced staff. And then we moved to Lambourne, we kind of had to start from scratch. And I think we put together a really good team of people around us. And we've put a lot of focus into developing our staff. And, we've got a real focus on good horsemanship, but just developing them and training them and creating a good working environment. I think, and that's really important. And I think maybe you can hear the things about the staffing crisis and things like that. And I'm not saying it's easy and it's not completely the solution, but we have to face the fact that lots of industries are struggling for staff, particularly where it's kind of, an element of the labor, the work is manual labor. At the end of the day, we've got a pretty fun way of life and whatever job you're doing within the, in a training yard. And, you've got to focus and you're driving to get winners and you've got all of that going on. But I think a lot of people tend to exploit their staff in grounds of, because it's a fun job, they can pay them very much and not give them many days off and things like that. And
how easy is it to get good staff in racing these days?
It's not easy, but, we've worked very hard on it. There's a thing called the Licensed Team Champion Awards, which is sort of set up by the NTF to try and showcase good examples of working practice. And I think we won it a couple of years ago, and then there's sort of categories, and we've won various categories every year. We won 2 of the 4 categories in the leadership section this year, and we're runner-up in that. So it creates a reputation, and it's word of mouth, because yes, there's an attraction to go and work for, say, John Gost and William Haggis, where the horses are, you're going to get to be around those very good horses. Although inevitably what happens is the people who've been there a long time and are very good generally get those opportunities. But if you're going to be working for anyone, slightly lower down the ladder, there's 20 trainers in this village and probably all have roughly, one might have a very good horse one year and the next year it'll be someone else, and it moves around a bit. So actually it then becomes about the people you're working with and the environment that you're working in. And we're fortunate that we've managed to create a place where I think people want to work, and I hope they enjoy working here. And touch wood, generally when we have grown a little bit and we've needed some more people, we've been able to find them. Maybe not immediately, but there's people coming, and there are people out there who want to work.
This is the thing, it's difficult because obviously we know the financial constraints of racing's product, really. It's sort of a trickle down kind of thing. So I understand the difficulty for many trainers to employ staff on good terms and to enjoy the job and everything, because of the pressures that everyone's under. Have you felt that pressure?
Yeah, no, you definitely feel that pressure. At the end of the day, you get to points in the year and you think, well, that horse is going to go off, that horse is no good, that owner decides he wants to move that horse is injured, that horse needs 2 months out, that horse is no good, it's going to the sales, and suddenly you're down 4 or 5 horses, and you're like, okay, you really need to keep working on finding the next horses all the time to replace them, to keep your numbers at the level where you can keep affording to pay your staff. Your staff are your biggest expense, hugely. And that's why, as trainers, the product of owning racehorses needs to be as attractive as possible so that we can keep bringing people back to owning horses. We can't sell horses as trainers and I use, sell ownership and the thing of it, then the game doesn't work. And ultimately the buck stops with us. If we can't encourage people to come in and actually pay to have that horse in training, on some levels that's individual responsibility, but I think there's also a collective responsibility of the industry to make it attractive enough for enough people that the industry can thrive. Because, if there's not enough owners, the racing's not competitive and the whole thing falls apart. And if there's not enough owners, there's no point breeding horses because nobody wants to pay for them.
Exactly. And we'll come on to this in more detail. Just to clarify, the last couple of years there, you and Claire have had some decent seasons, really, with what you've got. And I was looking through some stats. The last 2 years in particular have probably been one of your better ones. Obviously, one of your star horse, really, that I mentioned on a pod previously, Outgate. He's being sold to Hong Kong, I believe.
Being sold to Hong Kong, yeah. The financial incentive to sell is huge. And we just sat down and we looked at the race we'd won and we looked at where we were going next, and we'd kind of been looking at it already. And you click on the thing and see who won that race last year, and you see it's Baid. You're like, probably. Okay, look, he was maybe an exceptional winner of those races, but you've got to believe that is the horse that good? And even if he is, and look, he's not bred like Baid is, so he's prospects as a stallion are probably somewhat limited. It just, it makes sense to do that and go forward. But as a trainer, that's quite frustrating because our 3-year-olds this year aren't the most, they've won races and they are what they are. But as a whole, they're probably not the most talented bunch of horses we've trained. And you look as, okay, what are we keeping in training as a 4-year-old? And bar a couple of ones that have been a bit backward and slow and have got a bit more to come in terms of where they are, loads that you're hugely excited about as 4-year-olds in that group. We look to have a nice bunch of 2-year-olds, and I think of the 2-year-olds we've run, I think 40% of them have won, and they all look useful. So,
would it be fair to say, Dan, that you and Claire train for the longer term? Like, in other words, to bring the horse forward steadily, get the right mark, progress it through the 3-year-old ranks, that kind of thing. Because obviously everyone knows that if you're shopping at the lower end, the sales markets, or you've got owners that haven't got the big bucks to send you fantastic yearlings, etc., then the correct strategy surely is to bring a horse on steadily and enhance its career from the right mark. Is that fair to say?
I think so. I mean, I think because fundamentally it comes back to horsemanship first. You want to build a sound horse. So you want to build a horse that can last. I mean, there's nothing very exciting about winning first time out and there's no improvement left. And then you're just dealing with soundness issues the whole time along.
Yeah.
And I think for most horses in training, it just seems like the right way to do it is to build and gradually develop and improve. And yeah, I think that's the right way to do it. We can train an early 2-year-old if you get sent one, but it's not something that we try and buy a horse. I suppose when we go to sale, we try and buy a horse that can win at 2 and has got the physique to win at 2, but will be better again at 3. So in that respect, it's probably by design. But, you get sent horses of all types. And I think we had the first runner for See the Moon over 5 furlongs at Chelmsford. I got an email from Landwade's Kirsten Rousing's know that she was making her debut and everything, and we thought she'd make a decent fist of things, but she would develop as the season went on. And so I got a somewhat reply that was along the lines of, well, we wish you the best of luck. Hadn't expected to see the Moon running over 5 furlongs in April. By the end of the season, when she'd won 3 races over 6 furlongs as a 2-year-old, they were suddenly quite keen on her because actually it was promoting that the stallion could get 2 and all the rest of it. But yeah, it comes down to, so we do a lot of we try and really focus on doing is we'd analyse the stride at home and we'd do the genetic testing and all the rest of it, and it clearly identified her as a sprinter, and it was the right path to go down. A reasonably good sprinter. But for a mare that she was actually an unsold yearling at 10 grand, and I think she won 7 races between 2 and 3. So,
yeah. Do you have many gambling owners in the yard at the moment, or is it mainly people that want to see the horse progress?
Complete mix. I mean, we wouldn't have loads of gambling owners. We'd have a few that they want to be very involved in the placement of their horses and thinking about that in the future, and others would be hands off. And we'd always have the sort of belief that you've got to work together with your owner to achieve what their ambitions are.
Yeah.
So if your ambition is to have a good bet somewhere, then we'll sit down and we'll say, okay, well, this is how we'd go about doing that. And, often those sort of more gambling owners, they're very aware of the form book, and they're also aware of, making things too obvious and not too obvious, and you'll have a discussion. And what we've never really had is you hear of them is people who, they kind of get very upset when things don't work out and all the rest of it. And I think, well, what we can do is get the horse ready to the best of our ability, and we can all say it's the right race or the wrong race, and hopefully we get it right and we all make a few quid. But
yeah, I noticed as well, it's not a friend of the show or anything, but he's certainly someone that I've engaged with on Twitter. James Finch, Anderleap. You improved Anderleap quite markedly this summer.
I suppose he arrived on the right mark.
Yeah.
And initially it was probably just putting him in the right races.
Good placing, very good placing. I mean, can you give us some insight? I mean, James will be fine, I'm sure. But was James involved with the placing, etc.? Was that an example of an owner that likes to be involved in placing of his horses?
Early on, he was kind of fairly hands off, and then we kind of always had in the back of our heads that if we could get him right, the race he won at Sandown, the Sunday Series race, it was more about chasing the prize money at that stage, and there was a race sort of in between when we'd won 2. He won his first start, and then we were kind of touched off, and I suppose we were learning the horse a little bit there a couple of times, and then we won 2 on the bounce, a very soft apprentice race, and then we went to Beverley and nobody wanted to run against us. And then there was a race in between, and I was quite keen to go for it and sort of put together this 4-timer, and James sort of said, "Whoa, I don't want to spoil our chance of winning the big prize on the Sunday by running another little win at somewhere where it wouldn't have taken a lot of winning." I think it was an amateur race at Catterick, a big weight, and meant another penalty for the Sunday series. In fairness to him, it was probably the right call. But yeah, so I mean, that was the sort of discussion. But he's a real thinker about, I suppose, optimising it. And see, I think James has a bet. I don't really know. Like, he doesn't discuss that side of things.
No, it's certainly something I wouldn't pry into.
But, some owners discuss and they say, "Oh, should I have a bet today or not?" And I think you get other owners, and I think this is how James operates. I don't really know him that well, but he very much take what you say, and he'd make his own decisions, and you wouldn't know one way or another. And I find probably the couple of successful gambling owners we've worked with, they wouldn't really tell you when they've had a bet and when they haven't had a bet.
They'd assess the race for themselves, etc. Yeah,
exactly.
I will hold it to you. By the end of the show, I would love a good long-term prospect of yours. Maybe, one of these that won't affect a gambling owner. That So I'm going to hold you to that by the end of the show. Just before we kick on to chew the fat stage about the racing industry, just one thing. A previous show, I think I was quite harsh on you and Claire. And who was it that sent that email to me? Was it you or Claire? Who did it? The big long one that told me off.
Oh, that was me. Claire's far too sensible to get involved on social media and engage with people. And no. I get bollockings for stuff like that. But
no. Listen, this is the good thing about this podcast. This is not Nick Look. This is fair game. If we dish it, you can give it back. We like that sort of thing. So it definitely wasn't frowned upon.
But then we discussed when I said they should. All I did was put the data out, and I got I got held up as the man who was saying that trainers needed to be capped.
That was me on Return to Trade, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Which I just love the fact that you've got all these trainers at the top end saying, on one hand, they shouldn't have any restraint on how many horses they can trade, but racecourses should be completely restricted on how many races they can run and all the rest of it. I find it it's a bit contradictory, shall we say.
Later in the show, I'm going to produce a suggestion about how we could possibly improve the fixture list. I want to hear your thoughts. But just to finish off, just to boost Daniel and Claire here, they are punters' pals. And I've dug a stat out here because I love digging stats out. Seeing I've got them completely wrong in the last 2 years. If you back Daniel and Claire, the last 2 years, fancied runners, you'd be well in front. And I can prove this point. This is Daniel and Claire's strike rate with favourites, 37.85% strike rate with favourites, right? If you play at Betfair SP, you make 18% on investment. They even beat Industry SP, the tight bookmakers that give nothing away. They beat that as well. I mean, that's just absolutely stunning. These are safe trainers. When you see a fancied one of Daniel and Claire Kubler's and you like it as well, you can plough in. There's no shenanigans there with Daniel and Claire. So great stat. Again, shows how certain trainers, they want to train winners. They want to do well. They want to progress. Maybe in past shows, I've been a little bit harsh.
I think probably. I'm no bones about saying we're probably slightly slow developers. We had a couple of very good horses in our second year of training, and we didn't make full use of publicising that and kind of getting out there. And neither of us we're probably both in a social situation quite shy people. We wouldn't be very good at the small talk and all that kind of stuff and selling ourselves. So, which is problematic because actually, as much of this job is about the horses, is actually about people, and it's about putting yourself up to people and saying, look, we can train horses as well as anyone, and getting that word out there. But also kind of making people want to support. Any trainer needs backing and support of people to invest in, and has to have the charm and the charisma to do that. That's probably where we've slightly let ourselves down. And then we first moved to Lambourne, we made a bit of a mess of things, and it was a difficult thing. But the last 2 years we've been working out of a yard that we've built ourselves has been completely finished. It's worked pretty well the last couple of years, and it's kind of like that was phase one, and this is phase two of the career now, these last couple of years, and we just need to keep building now. And
to be fair, Daniel, this is where I'll back you. The last 2 years have been excellent. We say what we think here on Barstewards, and I've been critical of in the past. I don't mind admitting it's on past shows, but the last 2 years, the statistics say you're going in the right direction, which is a real good thing. Okay, we're going to move on now to the chewy part of the show. Love this. I've been excited for this all day. This is for Daniel to basically give his views on everything, the structure of the sport, basically from funding to breeding to owners to racecourses to everything to do with it. King for a day, Daniel Kubler. We're going to come on to the funding of the sport first, Dan. If you were king for a day, how would you renegotiate the funding of the sport? Obviously, you know currently how it is with the bookmakers and the profits and so how would you sit down and say, this is what we need to do?
Well, I think the first thing that you need to do is, we have this thing where we always say, oh, we need, if we get another 10 million for prize money or whatever it is, that would be great. And it's like, no, what we need to do is work out, okay, let's have some proper ambition. What do we want the prize money to be? You need to say, right, this is a sport, is what we want to do. We need a clear plan as to how do we want to structure the sport so it's appealing to betting on, and then how the hell do we make that product work? How do we get the funding to do that? And what's the amount? What's the amount we need to make it work? And work backwards from that.
Yeah, agreed. It's a bit like sustainability. It's like the Premier League. There's owners that spend more money than on wages than what's coming in the till. But this is fundamental business that affects jobs across the industry. And I mean, as a former owner myself, it was very difficult to make ends meet, because in the UK you'd have to win with the 70 or probably 3 times and place a few times to break even. It's nearly impossible to do. So that's a very good point. So yeah, we'd start off, what is the right prize money needed to attract owners to the sport? John, I'm going to bring you in.
Would you base that on an existing fixture list though to support, or
and this is what
fixture list?
To build the whole thing together, but to start with, you need to say, okay, right, you have to start with the very top level, and I think you have to start up there, because you have to say, right, okay, let's call it the best in the world and not get too bogged down in that argument, and say this is the real Premier League stuff. Okay, so how do we keep it relevant? Well, you can only do that with prize money, ultimately. So, okay, so what do we have to do to keep the best horses coming in so that the Juddmonte International keeps being rated the best race in the world, and all the similar things? Okay, so what level of prize money do we need to do that? So that's where you start. And then you say, okay, well, how do we stop the prospects that may go onto these races from leaving? How much do we need to do that to make it so that, I think there was one yesterday, was there a William Haggas horse that got sold to Australia?
Salcombe.
Yeah, exactly.
The Melrose winner.
Yeah, Melrose winner. Surely that horse, what we really need is the prize money to be appealing enough that those lads can turn around and say, you know what, actually, if we develop this horse, and okay, if it turns out to be the Coronation Cup winner next year, okay, well that wouldn't be a problem, but the reality is it's probably going to be a bit below there, but it's clearly better than just the Melrose winner. So we need to make it appealing enough that the gamble you're taking is that, let's argument say they got offered $1 million and they said, well, actually we've got no chance of ever making more than 100 grand with this horse, which is probably the maths they've done. If they could make $500,000, they say, okay, well, we've got a downside, but we've also got an upside, and you create a balance between where the proposition becomes that enough people keep horses and keep going with them, make those races more competitive. And what it does is it makes the pathway up to those Group 1s better. Instead of getting 4 or 5 runner Group 2s and 3s, you'd have 10 runners, and there'd be more interesting races.
For example, the Cambridgeshire. We formerly had a consolation Cambridgeshire, a silver Cambridgeshire. We can't even fill the Cambridgeshire. We've got a dearth of real talent at the higher end because, like you say, a lot of horses are maybe staying in Dubai, Australia, Hong Kong.
I mean, without getting too specific, I think a lot of these early closing handicaps, the issue is, like, we'd have horses that might sneak into the lower end of something like that. I mean, you have to enter and you're putting up a few £100 or £1,000 or whatever it is to enter to run in some of these races. And then you're sort of thinking, well, probably not going to have a massively great chance in it. So what's the point in entering? I don't want to go and run and finish 15th and everyone will say, well, you did a pretty good run for the Cambridgeshire. Like, it's a waste of time. It's not appealing as an owner to go and run in those races if you haven't got a realistic chance in them. And the trouble is, some of these very big yards that have got loads of horses, they still have 1 or 2 unexposed horses that they've probably looked after for these races that will come in as back-end 3-year-olds or early foot, the Lincolnshire. How often is the Lincoln won by a horse that goes on to win Group 3s and Group 2s and is basically just a handicap block? Yet you're asking me in January, do I want to put my fairly decent handicapper in the race because it's a bit of a lottery and you might have a chance. You're asking your owner to fork up more and more for these early closing entries. And it's the same reason why some of these big group races have relatively small fields, because it's all very well saying there's £5,000 of prize money for finishing fifth, but what gets lost is that you've paid £5,000 to even turn up.
Don't get me on about BHA and their fees. I mean, as an owner, the fees are ridiculous. You get colours you have to pay every year for racing admin, everything. Literally, they stick it up the owner any way they can to get any kind of... I mean, what's this about, like, authority to act?
Okay, so one of the things that the BHA, and in fairness, and this is the BHA being really rubbish at communicating these things, is the BHA have a budget and they need to somehow fund the administration of your sport, so that when that the clerk of the scales gets paid for, and all of these people get paid for, and all these salaries get paid on all these people that just run the day-to-day admin of the sport. And the trouble is, how do you charge for that?
It would have helped if the BHA hadn't spent absolutely millions of pounds on court cases trying to prosecute Kieran Fallon and everyone else in the past, and doing their absolute brains in and messing court cases up. Because if they hadn't done that, there'd have been plenty in the coffers. It just seems like everyone else pays for their absolute ridiculous... John?
Well, they spend an awful lot on top execs going from job to job as well, don't they, that come in, do the 3 years and bugger off because they have no love or pride in the sport. They're just there for the kudos of the job at the time. And
it's a career.
Yeah, they're nothing for the game at all.
Yeah, and that's the biggest problem, is they're not going to be sat there for the next 20 years. He's left now, I was once talking to Nick Rust at some industry conference thing that they'd organised, and he didn't know who I was, and why should he? But he just made a comment about our trainers are so argumentative and so difficult, and they don't know what they're talking about, and they just don't get it. The problem is that him in particular, he didn't understand. We're running a business. We understand exactly how the finances work. And if we're turning around and saying to the BHA, we're really struggling here as trainers to find enough owners, you've got a problem. In the same way as if racecourses say, we've got a problem getting people to come in through the doors and pay entry fees, we've got a problem at sport. Like, they need to listen to these groups.
I've been an owner for many years, and I'm finally getting out because it's just an absolute waste of time. It literally is. There's no way I could ever even think about breaking even. I'd have to do it for a complete love of the sport. I've enormous disposable income to be involved, unless you do it in syndication, which admittedly does work, and syndicates should be applauded and attracted. But at the same time, for individual owners that I've enjoyed the sport for many years, had many winners, but I just cannot justify throwing the kind of money that needs to be thrown. Like you said, Dan, when a horse gets injured, and it could be a £4,000 bets bill, it could be anything, and then you nurture a horse back to health, and then it doesn't work out, and then so you've got those costs to bear, and that's the things that probably the racing public don't see. Then you're getting told, we'll go for a race at Wolverhampton worth 2,200 to the winner. Yeah. And then my bill comes in and that's what it is. It's 2,200 for the last month. So it's like, oh, well, I've won a race, but then it's just an absolute money pit. At the bottom end, it is. That's how I see it as now a former owner. And yeah, it's disappointing. I love the sport. Absolutely love the sport. Yeah. Love it to bits.
The challenge is finding that happy medium, whereas it's a hobby, but at the same time, you need to make the hobby a bit more accessible. Yeah. Plenty of people spend fortunes on their hobby, but I think the issue with this one is what's frustrating is there's people making money out of you indulging in your hobby, and you're getting nothing for it, or very little for it. And I think that's, nobody buys a racehorse thinking, oh yeah, we're going to make loads of money here. If they do, they someone sold them up the garden path. But if you can go in and say, like, look, if we get a half decent horse here, we'll make a bit and it'll be a bit fun. And if we don't, well, look, it's fun and they don't all work out, and hopefully we can go on to the next one. And it becomes a sort of long-term thing, and you can stomach losing a bit each year. It's a bit, I suppose, like most punters. Most punters wouldn't make money, but they get a certain satisfaction. And I think you were talking about the other day, they get a certain satisfaction when they get it right, and it's that feeling of it. And they enjoy the process, and they enjoy doing it. And they enjoy the sort of, the camaraderie that comes with the thrill of a winner and all of that sort of things. But what's frustrating, I think, for a lot of owners is they realise that they're putting loads in and they're getting very little back, while bookmakers are making huge profits and racecourses, generally seem to be doing quite well. It's interesting that with a little bit of pressure around the prize money thing, whether you're a fan of him or not, but Rafe Beckett, I think, has actually done quite a good job of applying pressure. And
call him Ralph, Dan, I dare you.
We like Ralph better than Rafe.
Yeah, call him Ralph.
He's all right. He's all right, really. His heart's in the right place.
It is, to be fair. He talks a lot of sense.
And I think sometimes, people mistake the passion for other things, and he cares deeply about the sport. And I think he's worked hard with people to make small gains. And art prize money at the lower end, and we all like to criticise art because it's easy to do it. But actually, I was going through some stuff the other day, and they're paying better prize money than the Jockey Club. So now the pressure's on Jockey Club because supposedly they're putting everything back into the sport. So either they're running an inefficient organisation or something's not quite right there. So they need to step up the game now because they need to be leading the way and saying, okay, well, if you're going to put up $9,000 for every Class 5 handicap, we're going to put up 10. And if you can create some proper competition, which is the one plus of maybe having these smaller field sizes, is actually they've realised they need to do more to encourage it. And I did some work in the summer on field sizes. And, there's a very clear correlation when you take handicaps of the same class over the same distance. There's a correlation between field size and prize money.
I saw this, and you went all Oxford and Cambridge on me on this. It was pretty intense. Yes, you were right. Are you certain the stats back up, Dan?
Yeah, I'm pretty certain. I did get someone else who's probably better at maths to look at it than me, and he provided me with the figures and said, no, you're right here. So therefore, one of the solutions is to have better prize money. To take the extreme version, the Sunday series, they pretty much all had a field, almost a full field. Take a race like the Carlisle Bet, whatever the maximum field size is at Carlisle, 0 to 85 Class 4 mile handicappers, all going hell for leather for $17,000 to the winner or something.
It's true. In the early years, when they upped the prize money for that, I can remember he didn't fill. Literally, as if no one took any notice. No, we're not sending one up to Carlisle. No. It was only I think it sort of cottoned on in about 2010, 2011. It's hang on a minute, this is quite a decent race to target. Yeah.
And that's the thing, is all these things, when you make a change to the race programme and you put more money or something somewhere, they always announce it far too close to the race or far too close. We've got a horse, Helm Rock, who's won at Carlisle 3 times, and he's a miler. Well, I know we went for it this year. The ground was quick, so we didn't run. So we waited. But if the ground ever comes up at soft at Carlisle for the Carlisle Bell, he's running there. His whole season is basically next year will be built around that. And if it doesn't work out, there'll be somewhere else for him to go when the ground is soft. But you actually start creating a thing until you get full fields for these things. Brighton Challenge Miles, another one. They've got those series of Brighton. So we won that 2 years ago.
I know you've got a ridiculous record at Brighton. Ridiculous.
Because we got sound. Go on fast.
It's something like 31% strike rate at Brighton. Do you have a family holiday there and lay them out for certain races?
Yes,
No. We were talking earlier about developing sound horses. The ground is often very quick at Brighton. We talked about moaning at Clark's. I was a little bit frustrated this year. We ran and they'd water, because it's a 3-day meeting. They'd put a bit of water on because it was so dry and it was so hot. And obviously, it's not like a normal meeting where you put some water on the day before and it's all nice for the following day. You kind of have to over-egg it because you haven't got time because you're running 3 days in a row. And I get that. And I just thought they'd slightly overdone it and that the race was a bit slow and it probably didn't suit our horse. But it was probably also Sour Grapes. She wasn't in as good form as she had been the previous year. That race was for, 17, 20 grand to the winner or something like that. And we ran in exactly the same conditioned race earlier in the season. And it was for 10 and there was 6 runners or something and nothing really were lower in the ratings than would normally get into a Class 4 handicap. They're anecdotal examples, but you get less runners because the prize money's not there. Things like, you'll notice, fillies handicaps have got a lot more competitive in the last couple of seasons. And it's because they put a whole load in, but they didn't really say, we're doing this. And so people didn't keep a 3-year-old turning 4 filly in training because there wasn't really, if they weren't going to make up into a listed horse and that there was no programme for them. Whereas now is actually, there is a programme and it creates a kind of pathway to maybe encourage an owner with a T-rated 3-year-old filly that rather than, okay, she's got an all right pedigree, let's sell her as a broodmare prospect or breed her ourselves. Actually, let's see how much she improves over the winter. And if she improves £20, we're going to get black type. And if not, there's this series of fillies handicaps for her to run in. So you're encouraged to run in those. And initially they had very small fields, but actually the last couple of years the fields have started to go up a bit, or it seems like it with the fillies that we've had.
Isn't that because the lack of demand for fillies like worldwide? No one wants fillies. They're all selling them. Look at Jess Smith. Jess Smith, alcohol-free. You can have alcohol-free. La Petite Coco for sale. They don't want the fillies. Unless you're going to breed with them, no one's really interested in, unless they're going to be like worldwide money spin. People are
because probably better. You'll probably make more out of the filly the day you sell her at Tats for 5 million than you ever will out. How many progeny do you need to sell for serious money?
Yeah. Well, Jeff Smith said the same. Said we alcohol free. He was quite honest. He said literally been a fantastic filly, but I've already got the mares, the right lines I want to breed from, and alcohol free will be fun for someone else. And he even admitted, I'm getting old now. It's a time for enjoying life. Like he even said, it'd be 5 or 6 years before he saw progeny from alcohol free sort of hit the racetrack and doing well. So yeah, it's kind of, I get that. Totally get it. That's the thing with fillies, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think, but what was happening before is there was no program for it, unless they were obviously very good already, then fine. But you need to create, I think, a lot of racing about, if you want to keep the numbers up in training, you've got to create opportunities for their horses. And it's one of the weaknesses in this country of the program is that even if you've got a good horse, once you reach your mark, it's very hard until you can win another race. And you're almost better off if you're about winning races, you're almost better off saying, well, I've got my 90-something horse now, but he can't win off this mark. And it'll take me so long to get him back down into the 80s where he can win. I may as well sell him, go and buy a new horse. And even if it's only rated 60, I'll get my 3 wins and then he'll reach his mark and we'll trade in and go for another one. And the system kind of encourages that. There's a lot that needs to be looked at in the program. And, having worked in America, you've maybe got a program where good horses, there's sort of allowance races for horses that haven't won for the last year. So if you've got a decent horse and you've been trying to win really good races and you're just not quite getting the job done, you can actually it's worthwhile having your good horse in training, because you can go and win one of these races where you'll take on similar horses and you'll win, and that kind of covers your costs for the year, and you say, okay, right, now let's go back in and try these better races again. So there's an encouragement there for a good horse, whereas here, what do you do with that horse?
No, indeed. So Bloodstock and Breeding, Dan. Again, king for a day. What would you change with the industry? Are we breeding too many horses still? We talked about cap, how many horses people can train. Do we put a cap on the breeding industry? What's your views on this?
I think breeding is interesting because I think when you go away from racing and you look at the bigger picture, bloodstock is a global commodity that moves around the world. And I think one of the things about, if we want to keep British racing at the forefront, we've got to create the incentive that the best bloodstock's kept here, because ultimately if you keep selling off the best genetics, you aren't going to keep producing the best horses.
That's the worry. The genetics are heading abroad right now.
Yeah. Talked about those fillies. Where are most of them going to end up?
Japan.
Yeah, Japan, or even America. The bloodstock market's booming in America at the moment. And Australia, the sales companies, they encourage as much trading of horses as possible. And, I kind of get they're really pushing people to sell horses because that's how they make their money and all the rest of it. How much do they really put back into the sport itself? Tattersalls has a lot of shareholders who are making huge profits every year, and all take it. How much really goes back into racing? And they're shipping over, by all accounts, a huge number of people from Australia to come and buy best yearlings in Book 1 and 2, putting on planes for them and all sorts of ways. What someone was telling me the other day. So, even as yearling, they might not be the best ones. That only time will tell. But if they keep turning up every year and taking 100 yearlings out of Book 1, well, that's 20% of supposedly the best prospects that are offered at public auction every year are heading down there before they've even raced. That's another chunk of horses we're losing before we even start.
Yeah. Whilst we've got the traditional calendar, like the world does envy. The world does envy the British racing calendar. That's a fact. The world looks upon our guineas, our racing calendar is the finest in the world. That, like you said, that to a point, that is down to prize money. And if the best horses or the mares start disappearing abroad, Japan buy some quality mares that we've got from good bloodlines. We're losing owners like Judmont, Sheikh Hamdan. I'll say the Queen, even though the Queen's got some fiery bloodlines, would you say, Dan? Golden Stream, horses like that. The Queen's line seems to produce some quality horses, but some real fiery sort.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's various different families there, and certainly they've done a lot. I mean, it was always difficult because she could never purchase horses at public auction because of how it would look and things like that. And I don't know all the ins and outs, but she seemed to acquire various, and there seemed to be trades and things with other major owner breeders, and it looked like there was a sort of reinvigorating of the bloodlines. It'll be interesting to see what happens there, how much of it stays together, how much of it gets cut back, because obviously it felt like over the last 4 or 5 years that it was almost like, well, let's put a bit more into it and kind of have a real go at it for a few years. But what's going to happen now, I don't know. Whatever your views on monarchy and things like this, and it's not a debate I want to get involved in, but clearly her thing that she was really into was her hobby.
She had with a lot of trainers at the finish, didn't she?
Yeah, and a lot of horses. I mean, I think maybe it's you guys. Were you guys saying the other day that she'd had more runners last year than she'd ever had or something?
Yeah, I didn't actually double check it, but I think the last year was like more runners than ever.
I did, yeah. It's more most runners. Apparently, some of the yearlings, they're saying that they look really good going forward for the Queen. So, be interesting to see next year's runners. I presume Camilla's taking over the administrative duties for now. Whether it continues, we don't know. Everyone's in the dark, but
yeah, exactly. Best speculate.
Yeah, absolutely. So moving on, Dan Kubler, right? You're in charge of race courses, so any race course in particular. But we've had an issue at the Barstewards for a long time back. The clientele the race courses are pushing for. Now we all know it's money-making object and pop concerts, all fun, and it makes money for the tracks. We get that, but there is an element here that race courses are not really in touch with the racing fraternity again about pricing of food and everything else. It's becoming very expensive to go racing sometimes.
Yeah, and I think one of the challenges here is that I suppose people like to complain, and for some reason I ended up with loads of cricket stuff on my Twitter. I don't know how, but in the middle of the summer, and I was like, geez, these guys could be talking about race courses. They're talking about gimmicky new events like the 100. They're talking about how expensive a pint is, talking about how expensive the food is, how expensive the tickets are. And, there's an element, I think sometimes you need to step back at these arguments and say, well, this isn't just a racing issue. This is the cost of living's going up, and it's the staffing for things like racecourses that must be going through the roof.
But yeah, look at France. France can admit people to their premier.
But it's a massively government subsidised funding.
Yeah, we're going back to the funding, which is basically, you might be in Stuart Williams' camp here as a trainer. Stuart Williams came on the show and said that he would prefer a tote-based product. So then racing would...
Stuart likes a tickle.
I know, exactly. This is the man the trainer that's landed the biggest gamble with one of the most gambling owners in Patrick Veach. 150s into, what was it? I can't remember what the SP was, but it was short. He did it, and he's championing a tote system now. Terrible from the friend of the show, Stuart Williams. Championing a tote system. But Daniel Kubler, would you be in favour of a tote system like King Kong?
I would think that there's room for everything. I think more use could be made of the tote. I think it is a more direct way of putting more money into the sport, and whether there's a way we can look at using the tote better. And I think the guys who are running the tote at the moment are sort of, they're doing a good job to try and put more into the sport and try and promote it as a way of betting and things like that. But I wouldn't be a massive punter, but surely if you're doing it seriously, you want to know what price you're getting.
Yeah, exactly.
I worked in America, and when we were out there, that's a tote system. And you learn to bet differently, and you have to pay the kind of pick fours and pick sixes and stuff like that. And you think about a race card differently, you think about the races slightly differently, because you're not necessarily, ultimately the puzzle, I suppose, becomes the same. You're still looking for angles.
But again, to discuss the future of what it could look like under a tote system, if you look at America and France, and I've been to lots of American racetracks, it's dead. Like, I'm not on about the big race days, You go to a normal, I suppose, like Wolverhampton or whatever on a Monday. You go to Calder, well, Gulfstream Park West now, and there's like literally 80 to 100 people there. They're all playing poker upstairs in the poker rooms and on the in the casino part, but no one's actually watching the racing. But that's fine. They don't mind that because everyone's betting off course into the pools. The pools are okay, and then 30% go into the racing. But then there's no atmosphere at the tracks.
Yeah, and this is one of the problems of probably the genius things of the Premier League is the fact is that those 3 o'clock Saturday games or whatever time it is aren't televised. And it's much easier to sit at home and have the television running and flip, or two screens with the channel and your laptop going and punt like that and follow the sport that way than it is to go down to the course. And if you're serious about, or you really enjoy the betting element of it, then it probably makes more sense to stay at home. I don't know, tell me, but...
It definitely does.
Yeah.
I mean, because you can follow more. If there's 2 or 3 good meetings on, you don't really want to be at one of them.
No, exactly. And okay, the only downside is if you're into looking at horses in the paddock, and but there's very few people who can have the ability and the skill set to make that pay. So I think that's one of the areas that, and this is where these guys need to sit down and if they're going to share all their data, which is maybe they've all agreed that they're going to open their books and they're going to say this is what we've got, and what's going to work the best. We need to work out how do we get more from the bookmakers, or if the tote says if you do this for us, we'll be able to put a lot more in, then that's a good thing.
One of my earlier solutions regarding the betting was online punters should pay 1% of their winnings to racing. Who'd miss it? I'm saying this as a punter, really. I mean, it's 1% off my. I do it for a living, but it's 1% off my. Fine, I'm fine with that. Someone said to me, 1% off my winning bet that goes directly into the racing pot for prize money. I'd be absolutely all over that. I actually tried to get this to the BHA as a suggestion. I managed to squeak it through a parliamentary member that I won't name. The BHA turned it down flat. Why would they do that?
Was this when the former bookmaker was their chair?
Right to me.
The problem.
I thought 1%. If you enjoy the sport and you love the sport, like we all do, everyone does. Listen to this podcast. Everyone loves the sport. So,
I think the problem at the moment is the bookmakers have got no incentive for racing to be a profit-making margin for. It's so easy for them to use it as a loss-leading product to then get people to bet on other things. Ultimately, as racing, we have to realise that they get the football for free. And we're asking them to pay for horse racing. And that's one of the biggest challenges we've got, because they can go to other things and people are quite happy to bet on other things.
It is, because obviously in Ireland, it's classed as agriculture and it's funded from their purse. We don't have that luxury here, which is why we used to have betting tax. Betting tax kind of kills the industry in a way.
8%, and then the other 1% was levy, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Which is all you were advocating anyway.
Yeah, I'm literally saying that punters should pay 1% levy on winning selections. So you're not missing it. Literally, if you win money, so £10 at 5 to 2, that's £35. £25 profit. You pay literally 25 pence. But imagine all those 25 pences adding up at lots of bets over a year from the online books. That would be massive for the prize pot.
There's winnings as well, not the immoral gross profits tax.
No.
Both is fair.
Because have you noticed bookmakers moan? They'll say, well, it's us that's having to pay. Well, it's not, because it's your profits from punters that are actually betting. Yeah. But if punters voluntarily say, and happy to, and I would be, anyone should be, just 1%, because you're contributing then to the sport you love, just 1%. I don't think that's a lot to ask, and I think it's a great solution. I don't know what that would generate. It'd be interesting.
Yeah, if someone could work that out, it'd be quite interesting, because that would be interesting. And because I think one of the problems at the moment is obviously the bookmakers have got no real incentive to make, I've said it before, but no real incentive to make a profit from racing. And, they offer a diverse portfolio of products. So like a supermarket, they have some that are loss-leading products. And at the moment, it makes business sense to make it a loss-leading product.
Final subject, Dan, coming to you now on drug testing. I want you to tell me if you think the current protocol, especially in Britain and Ireland, that's close to our heart. The rest of the world is difficult to police. But are we doing enough on drug testing?
Are people or horses, or what we're talking about here now?
Horses. We could all have 6 lions and beat the shit out of each other at Goodwood.
I have to be careful I don't get taken down by someone. But it was interesting, I suppose, a couple of years ago when they had that feed testing thing, and they realised that the horses were going to test positive in France.
Oh yeah.
And they withdrew all their runners there, but they ran all the horses that had been on the same feed here in England. So they obviously knew that the protocol was different and that those horses would pass the test. I assume that they didn't just take the chance. But clearly people who are aware of how to beat the system, and whatever system you have in place, there's always going to be someone who's 2 steps ahead. And you look at something like cycling or like that, they're the experts in doping. The issue with any sort of dope testing and stuff like that is you do have the genuine cases where there's a a cross-contamination. So to explain, you can't train any athlete or any human being, like if you trip up and you smash yourself up and you take a couple of paracetamol, you'd actually be allowed to run in an IAAF athletic sanctioned event, but you wouldn't be, if you did the same for a horse, you're not allowed to run the next day.
No.
There's this withdrawal period, and the difficulty is finding the balance between that. And then there's going to be people who know how to use certain products to evade detection, and then there's the classic one is a drug called clenbuterol, ventopulmin, which opens up airways and has a perfectly valid reason. You've got a horse that's got a problem with its as an inflamed airway or mucus, and you're trying to clear that mucus so you can get ready for a race. But one of the side effects, it has a sort of anabolic effect, which is why lots of the cyclists have asthma, is because you can use ventopulmin then. It's just things like that. So that's where all the grey areas come in, and that's where dope testing is difficult, is it's not as black and white as you'd like to believe. And in an ideal world, you just give them their feed and then that would be it, and their water. But, you need to manage them, and for their welfare, you need to be using medications in certain circumstances. So that it's a challenging issue.
Do you make of the actual absolutely blatant ones? So there were Al-Zaruni, there was Charles Burns, famous cases.
So like the Al-Zaruni one, I mean, that's clearly a systematic approach that was being used, and they've tightened up a lot in response to that. And then sometimes that's all you can do, is introduce new rules in light of something happening.
Yeah. I touched this with Stuart Williams, and he said literally is you're trying to do the best for your horses without breaking the rules.
Yeah.
But obviously there's certain substances that you probably give to a horse that say, so you can't run within a certain time frame. If you administer this, you can't run within 30 days or whatever. I understand all that, but it's the blatant stuff. I mean, I think Seth Fishlake said, the guy that got done in America, he was transporting drugs across the world.
I think the American, having worked out in America, they've got a slightly different think that most people in this country, and I'm going to say that most people training horses in this country, it's not what can you get away with. That's not the approach. I think it's probably a cultural difference. But in America, the attitude is very much what can I get away with to do it. And it's just a different cultural difference. And now that's not to say that there's not people who clearly push the boundaries and work right on the limits of things. And I think one of my big things for the whole Zaruni case there was that there's no way just one person was involved.
Oh, no. He was the fall guy.
Yeah, exactly. He was the fall guy and the whole thing. And there will be people cheating now.
Absolutely.
We have to accept that. But
you never say this on air, but you know this.
They're going to be under-resourced in some respects. For things like this, you can't be doing enough. Where's the money coming from to fund things like this?
I mean, when you read cases like the Seth Fishlake one, for me, blew my mind because obviously this chap was sending them to Dubai, Australia, literally all over the world, undetectable. Literally, the undetectable. They even described what the drug would do. It would increase mass stamina. They'd just run forever. And there's some races in Ireland I've seen that where they'll cross the line and they'll go around again. They can't pull them up down the back. In a 0-60 handicap for libel reasons we could never state or say, but we know it happens, and this is where the game's tricky. But
in terms of people who are punting, they're probably looking at a yard and going, well, that's a very successful yard, and their horses, without wanting to get too simplistic about it, that yard they're a good outfit, they're a successful outfit probably, or not, as the case may be. It's more for the integrity of the sport and the breed and the long term that we really need to get on top of it. How widespread it is, I'd question, but I suppose what I'm saying is, in a training yard, there's so many people around, it's so labour intensive, there's so many people involved. Try and do something without someone somewhere giving the game away is almost impossible.
Yeah, it's not the easiest. I mean, I've heard of stories of horse boxers stopping on a lay-by, do it and stuff like that, and before the races, and some people listening to this say this is Dick Francis, this is nonsense, which it probably most is.
I was listening to your guys' last podcast, and you talk about jockeys laying things on the exchanges and stuff like that, and sort of, everyone looks for every reason the race didn't pan out the way they predicted, but actually maybe their judgment was just wrong.
Exactly that.
We're terrible at actually taking responsibility. It's human nature.
It is. The ability to admit you were completely wrong and it was a completely bad bet or the wrong choice. And that's it. Many a time there's a great explanation for it. At the time there isn't. And then that's been apparent because obviously proven court cases, Zaruni, Seth Fishman, these chaps.
It does seem quite hard to get away with it for your whole career. So maybe it does work. For a lot of trainers, if you're like us, so the deterrent is it's your livelihood. What else are you going to go and do? You're so invested in It's quite difficult to go and find something else to do. So why would you risk everything for it?
Agreed. That was a fascinating chat.
Before we finish, I just want to say one thing.
Go on.
I wish the racing media were more positive about what they were covering instead of running it down all the time. That's one of the biggest issues we've got.
Exactly.
Well, I know we spent an hour here moaning about what's wrong, but be more positive. If you're covering the 8:55 at Wolverhampton, look, we were all quite aware that this is not a Group 1, but at the same time, it's still a competitive race most of the time. You can still talk positively about people and horses and all the rest of it. And funnily enough, people respond and they want to watch that kind of stuff.
They do.
If you're telling them,
and the ones that don't listen to us,
they're going to turn off. You're watching a crap race. Oh, actually, what am I doing with time? Actually, I might just flick over and watch Britain's Got Talent or something equally benign.
Tipping Point for Slim. Yeah, Slim Gosden on Tipping Point. Yeah, while John does all the work. Dan, I need you now to give me a long-term prospect in your yard that's worth looking out for. You're not telling me a DD, but you're telling me a nice long-term prospect.
Long-term. Got an unraced half brother to Outgate. It's probably not very. It's probably quite obvious. He's going to have his first run in maybe on Monday at Foss Lass, where he gets to in one of these wonderful novices where he probably gets to take on a Gosden horse. He should be running in a Group 2 this weekend, but
hold him up, bring him through late into about 7th. Nudge. Yes, get the first run in nicely, and then drop him back in trip.
I think he's quite a nice horse to follow. Probably pretty obvious. And the mare's a good mare. She's produced some very good horses. And I think the long-term aim would be she really needs a black type horse now because we've sold the good one to Hong Kong.
Yeah, exactly. Is it same owners involved?
Yeah, slightly different owners, but bred by them, so sort of syndicate put together. But he's a nice horse.
So you're taking him to the Welsh Swamp?
Well, apparently it's not going to be.
It's going to be good ground, is it?
Well, they were talking about watering it.
All right. The only one rain shower there, it's done. It's finished. It's over. It's good to firm heavy in places.
He's a big old boy and he's by Cracksman, and I think next year is really what he's about. But he's one to keep an eye on. And then we've got a filly that's run 3 times. From what she's done at home, she should be a nice filly, but she's called Elterwater, and she's probably, in fairness, running 2 pretty. First time she let them all go 20 lengths in the stalls, which was an interesting debut. But the next 2 times she probably ran, in fairness, in what turned out to be quite decent maidens or novice races. She's called Elterwater. Huge, big, scopy filly, and really about next year. And she's one to watch out for. We might give her another spin or 2 this year, but she's one for next year. And she's a beautiful filly by Camelot, very big filly. And she's one certainly when we can go 1.25 miles with her next year. She should be very interesting. 64 for the Kublers. They're bouncing with this one for next year. This is the one that keeps them warm in the winter when they think this is the one. 64. But then they'll fool us all by running her over the wrong trip, the wrong track, and at 90% held up tactics just to fool Barstewards. But that's the way it is. That's the name of the game. But Elterwater for the Kublers. She's a nicely bred filly, and then I'll be disappointed if she's not quite a bit better than her mark. Should we leave it at that?
64. Look at that, 64. Mr. and Mrs. Middlebrook. What an exciting winter you've got. Fantastic show, Dan. Love your views and love the fact that we give you stick, you give me stick. It's fantastic. Yeah, love it. Great show. And hopefully we'll have you, like Stuart Williams, we'll have you on again. Especially when you feel annoyed about something, just give me an email.
Yeah, we'll drop you a line and say I really fancy a rant about this because you lads definitely seem to like a rant.
We do.
A rant.
Yeah, you can come on welcome on any Sunday sermon to chew the fat. So I hope you enjoyed this one-off Barstewards special with Daniel Kubler and also Claire Kubler. Claire does most of the work. She's the better half. That's all from us now. Me, Dan and John. Bye for now.